Hi, I'm Ashley with Campbell. Thanks for investing your time to help your community be a great place to live. Before you watch the video, make sure to click the subscribe button so that we can help you make educated decisions as a board member.
Thank you for joining. I appreciate it. If you've joined me before in the past, I've done this before a few times for Campbell. This time around, I added a little more onto our webinar just to talk about things that I find are important to like board members and property managers. I've done it alone. I've done it with some other people, but today I'm doing it with Mr. Jodi Spalding, my associate. Jodi, just talk about how much experience you have in this field.
I've worked for Complete Property Maintenance since 2002, 23 years. I've been a certified arborist since 2003, so I guess that's 22 years. And previously for Larry's Tree Service in the past, like 5 years.
Yeah, I'm prior, and I've been here around 8 or 9 years, doing tree work with Jodi. Just a little bit about our guys and our employees. So a lot of our employees have been here like a minimum of average, I would say, maybe what, 8 or 10 years.
Minimum.
Yeah, a lot of longevity. Our guys stay with us for a long time. Our tree trimmers. All of our guys have tree trimmer licenses. So even our ground guys, our drivers, everybody's got a tree trimmer's license. And Jodi and I just feel there's so much benefits to that, even though it doesn't seem like it at first. We want everybody to be aware of how to properly trim trees, how the whole process works, and in general, we just found it to be a much more effective system to have in place. It costs more money, but it's worth it because it pays out in the long run. All right, to talk a little bit about our company, if you're new here, if you haven't seen one of our webinars before, we work for Complete Property Maintenance, or CPM. So CPM was founded in 1977. So we've been in business around 48 years. We serve Broward, Palm Beach, Martin County, and Lucey counties. But we also work a little further south. So we have 4 main branches and several, or a lot of smaller branches and yards. Our headquarters is right here, located in Coconut Creek. Our main branch is in Coconut Creek. We also have a branch in Lantana, Jupiter, and Port St. Lucie. So services we offer are tree trimming, irrigation, FERT, pest control, landscape design, landscape lighting, and of course, landscape maintenance. So I'm going to go over, obviously, this webinar is about tree trimming, but if anybody has a request for any of our other services like landscape maintenance, anything else, FERT, irrigation, reach out to me. Hikari is going to send out my email address, and feel free to ask me questions. And also, if you're inquiring about any of our other services, I can forward that to any of the managers and they can respond. So some of the services we in the tree division provide are tree trimming, tree removal, root pruning, root barriers, stump grinding, holiday lighting, tree assessments, hurricane storm cleanup, and royal palm tides. You can see a couple pictures of jobs we've done in Coral Springs, Jupiter, Port St. Lucie. These are pictures on the far left of tree work we've done, landscape, holiday lighting. In the middle, you have pictures of us doing a root barrier. On the far right is landscape lighting. At the bottom here is work we did with my landscape manager. We stain trees. You stain Sylvester palms. Here you're looking at not a quad, but a 5-stalk Sylvester palm that we stain the trunk with a non-toxic translucent stain. And then on the far, or picture to the right, you can see we also did some lighting on that tree. All right, so this tree trimming course is going to cover several different subjects. Okay, you have seven sections. I just added another section, misconceptions and other useful information. Reasons for pruning and trimming. Or actually, Jodi, I'm gonna let you read these. I'm sorry.
Okay. Types of pruning and pruning terms. How to, what not to do, examples, misconceptions and other useful information, questions and answers.
So as we go through this webinar, it's my goal to kind of finish with maybe like 10 or 15 minutes in advance so that I can have you guys ask me questions. So we can do that live and answer those questions live. If we don't get to your question, either Ashley or Hikari will send your question to Jodi and I, and we can answer it that way. And you have our email addresses, or you'll have my email address. So anytime you want, just send me an email and I'll answer your question. All right, so reasons for pruning.
All right, tree health and structure, creating a central leader, removing codominant leaders. It's especially important to start with young trees. See, that's what a lot of people think. You wait till the trees get bigger, but that is not the case, because when they get bigger, the wounds you would make by trimming them, they do not heal as fast. So you start with the young trees, getting rid of codominant leaders and whatnot to start developing central leaders sooner than later. Safety, potentially dangerous limbs that may break due to deadwood, diseases, bad structure, falling coconuts, large seed pods, large palm fronds. Obstructing the visibility of pedestrians or drivers on roadways. Clearance for pedestrians on walkways or vehicles on roadways. Low branches or limbs interfering with traffic. Vista pruning. Pruning to be able to see a view from a window, balcony, etc., which a lot of clients like that. Prevent growing branches or palm fronds from touching roofs, gutters, homes, screen enclosures. They're a pathway for insects, rodents from branches or palm fronds touching roofs and structures. I want to elaborate on that. Every pest control guy will say the reason you're getting ants or whatever in your house is because of the branches. But meanwhile, I see these things climbing straight up the wall.
Really?
So
Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's always the tree's fault.
Yeah.
According to them.
But I know like insurance companies won't insure your property if I think you have any limbs or it's 2 feet or less from the property, or 18 inches, from the roof or building. So, and that's something we include in our annual tree trimming. If there's anything that's closer, 2 feet or closer to the building or the roof is what we trim back.
Allowing light to penetrate, reduce shaded areas for sod growth. Trees or palms dropping leaves, seeds, fruits, and making a mess on driveways, walkways, etc. Touching or obstructing lamppost lights or obstructing signs. Wind resistant, prevent limbs from breaking or trees from falling in high winds. Aesthetics, nicer to look at, shade trees and palm trees.
So these are all reasons you would trim trees and people trim trees. So this is just this is not in stone, but most of the time you're going to trim shade trees once a year, and palm trees should be trimmed at least once a year, and sometimes twice, usually depending on the kind of tree it is. You might want to do coconuts or royal palms twice because they could be a liability. If you want to keep a very nice, clean look to your palms, then if you can afford it or put it in your budget, have them trimmed twice a year. All right, so pruning terms. So first of all, the term prune and trim in the industry, we use it interchangeably, vice versa. One of the most important terms you're going to hear is subordinate, which is nothing more than cutting one branch back to a lateral branch. It is the most important term in this industry. Every cut you make is basically a subordinating cut. You'll hear the term reduce. And again, you can be referring to like a crown reduction or a selective reduction. Raising or lifting is essentially when I submit a proposal to somebody, if I want to have the canopy lifted, it's basically removing the lower limbs or limbs that are very, very low, some branches or some canopy that's very low, lifted up for clearance. Cleaning, which is just taking out water sprouts or suckers. Those water sprouts and suckers are the same thing. Diseased or broken branches, dead branches. Thinning is thinning out the canopy of the tree. That helps create wind flow for high winds. You'll hear a term called removal cut and also one called a reduction cut. Removal cut is, again, your standard subordination branch. So you have I'll draw a picture here to give a better example. So this is a picture of a limb. If I were to make a cut right here, you'd be doing a removal cut, which is taking off this smaller limb. And then if you do the opposite, which is you're removing the larger limb to the smaller limb, again, you're subordinating the branch because you're taking it back to a lateral branch. But if you do the opposite, that's called a reduction cut.
A lot of those cuts are used for reducing the weight on co-dominant leaders to make them safer so they don't break in a higher winds.
Crown reduction. That's just basically, I'll show examples later on in the PowerPoint. It's just reducing the entire crown of the tree. Crown meaning the entire canopy of the tree. Doesn't have to be the entire crown. You can do a selective crown reduction, which is just one side or an issue of a side of the tree that's causing issues. Okay, how to properly trim or prune. Pruning obviously is an important factor in keeping your trees healthy and looking their best. Proper technique is very, very important. Just because you're hiring a licensed and insured company doesn't exactly mean they're going to do it right. I have some examples in this PowerPoint of, and I'm not going to name any company, of course, but you'd be surprised. So licensed and insured companies, fairly large companies that are well known, for some reason have no clue sometimes how to trim trees, whether that be, they're growing too fast and they're just hiring people too fast and they're just sending people out there to do work that are inexperienced. I have no clue, but it's happening out there. You're getting big companies making illegal cuts, and later on I'm also going to mention or explain why that's a problem, because it's actually harmful to the tree. But to properly trim a branch or trim a tree, there's a 3-step cut method that's used, and this is using the ANSI 300 pruning standards, and that's the standard that every municipality, so every town, county, or city uses these rules. So ANSI 300, and they state that when you're cutting a branch that's larger than you can hold in one hand. So normally when you cut a branch, you can hold the branch in one hand, use a pruning saw, and cut that branch right outside the branch collar. If that branch is too heavy for you to hold, if you were to just cut it, what happens is as that branch falls down, it's going to start peeling the bark. And that's bad for the tree. The same way an illegal cut is bad for the tree, because when you don't cut right outside that branch collar, and I'm going to show you here with my laser pointer. So this section right here, that little bulging area where the trunk or whatever branch or a limb where it connects to a lateral branch, that little bulging area right here is your branch collar. This section of the tree contains healing properties of the tree. This is how the tree heals itself. So if you cut right outside that branch collar, that's a proper cut. That's how the tree can now heal itself, because it's got the healing properties right here. A wrong cut or an illegal cut would be cutting it flush. So cutting it right down here, getting rid of that branch collar, that's a bad cut. Even cutting it out here would be bad, because the branch collar can't operate. It doesn't actually heal this part of the stub. The further out you go, the less healing properties the tree has. And the problem with this is, if the tree can't heal itself, what happens is decaying organisms start working their way into the tree, and that's when you start getting branches and limbs that break, and that decay works its way all the way down to the trunk of the tree. So it's a very important thing to properly trim trees. So this 3-step method is basically, if it's a branch that you can't hold with one hand, use a 3-step method, which is first cut will be on the underside, and you go in about 1/3 in. Any further and the branch might actually pinch your saw or your cutting tool. And then your next cut will be number 2, which is right here. And as the branch starts falling and breaking and bark starts peeling, it'll cut off right here. And then you'll be left with this one section here, a little square section, which you can easily cut at the end, not worrying about the bark peeling. And again, if the bark peels, you're losing the healing properties of the tree, and the tree can get decay.
And if you notice, he said hand saws. Because when you're using a chainsaw, you need to keep both hands on the chainsaw at all times.
That's a good point.
It's how people, cut their arms, and we get a lot of customers that plant all these extravagant things under the tree and then they expect nothing to touch it. Well, the only way we do it, we try to do it with the handsaw, but if not, then we're using a chainsaw, whatever is cut with the chainsaw is basically gonna hit, or use a rope to rope down the limb.
Correct.
So you still have both hands on the chainsaw.
All right, so this right here, I just added this to the PowerPoint this year, and this is an example. So this is a screw pine. These first three pictures at the top are a picture of a screw pine. This is a customer of our, not a customer of ours, but the neighborhood we do service. We don't do homeowner trees here, but this homeowner here had a screw pine. Funny stories because he asked, maybe, I don't know, 3 years ago, asked me for a proposal on trimming the tree. It was very large. And I sent him a proposal. I think he asked me twice, and I think he also asked Jodi a separate time. Yeah, which was funny. And we found out that we had both proposed it, didn't use us ever, never used us. And then about a month ago, the account manager called me and said, look, homeowner here wants a price on, or actually was inquiring about their tree beside their home. And I went there and I see it's a screw pine and I see it's been trimmed. So I knocked on the door and it's a new homeowner. So the prior homeowner sold. And I'm looking at the tree and they went the cheap route of, I guess, maybe getting their landscaper to do it. And let me just pull up my laser pointer here. And you can see all these little stubs. So obviously the guy didn't have any clue what he was doing. I guess it's this landscape guy, had a chainsaw or pruning saw, just left stubs everywhere. So screw pines are a tropical tree, sort of like a palm tree in the palm tree family, but it is still a tree with branches and it does have branch collars. So the proper way to trim them is to subordinate the branches or bring them back to the branch collar. Not doing this doesn't allow the tree. So screw pines, for example, are like many other trees. They're not very good at compartmentalizing. So when they get a stub like this and the case starts working in, they can't protect themselves. And in this case, the reason I wanted to show these three pictures here is because this is like an accelerated example of what happens when you don't properly trim your trees. Let's take a look here. So yeah, that's just an example of what happens if you don't properly trim your tree. If you cut stubs, or another term for that is hat racking. Hat racking, which, and you can understand why that term is being used. If you can think of a hat rack, they don't. Do they still sell hat racks, by the way? Not that I remember, but people used to have these little hat racks. You hang your hat on them. That came inside the house. So, and that's exactly what a tree looks like after you trim it improperly. You leave full of like stubs everywhere. So the tree can't heal itself and it gets decay working its way into the tree. So this entire tree, when I looked at it, there was nothing I can do to salvage the tree. You can see in this picture right here where there's mushrooms. Actually, there are several areas of the tree where there's mushrooms growing on the branches. So this entire tree, I propose removing to the new homeowner because it's irreparable at this point. And then these bottom two pictures, the reason I include these here.
Terrific.
Yeah, and this is surprising because I have a section at the end, obviously, called misconceptions and other useful information. And one thing I'm going to talk about there is to educate. This is more for homeowners or board members to educate your residents on, getting companies or companies that know what they're doing to do the work. I mean, the easiest way to see, I would have thought, is to tell you to get somebody who's licensed and insured, or reputable. But again, that could be very hard to find. Yeah, exactly.
Not only they had racket, but they ripped.
Yeah,
it's like all of the.
Yeah, so they didn't use a 3-step cut method on these. They just used a 1-step cut method, and it peeled off the bark. But the point is, down here, these are pictures of a licensed insured company, fairly large company, which I will not name, made these cuts, and I was blown away. So I spoke to the property manager at one of the properties we do work for, and this is right above the president's, for that subdivision, the president's house. So she had the company that did the annual tree trimming last year do that work, and I couldn't believe it. And I asked several times, I said, are you sure this is not her landscaper or somebody, just like some doofus with a chainsaw? And she's like, no, it was that company, and that's just mind blowing. So
I think it's all in training. It's people don't understand, tree trimmers are a breed of their own. It's actually a real skill and art
Yeah.
profession.
Yeah, because if this tree now starts getting decay, I mean, it's gonna work its way down to the trunk, and then in, I don't know, 5, 10 years, it could take 10 years or 15 years, but the tree's gonna eventually die because, or there's a good chance it will, if it's not being trimmed properly.
Very weakly
Yeah,
attached limbs that grow from it.
This here is just an example of maintaining a strong central leader. And this is one of the biggest things when you're trimming trees is, when you plant trees, I think by ANSI 300 standards or most municipalities require you to plant a Florida grade 1 tree, which is basically a tree with a strong central leader and branches that can be trimmed. You got Florida Fancy, which is 1 grade above, which is basically, like almost a perfect looking tree, but they don't allow you to plant anything below a Florida grade 1. And the reason for that is, you have a tree with good structure, and creating a strong central leader is basically, a tree that has one strong trunk and then branches branching off. And each year you can take off another branch as the tree gets bigger and maintain that one strong central leader. The reason for that is when you start getting codominant leaders, let me see if we can draw that here. So let's say you have a trunk here with 2 leaders. This is the weakest where this union where the 2 branches or limbs branch off is the weakest section of the tree.
Because they're not attached, it's all bark in between the two leaders.
Yeah, this section right here, it has something called included bark, which is basically bark that gets fused on the inside of the tree. And I'll show you examples later on in the PowerPoint where in high winds, this limb will come down, and that's because it's a very weak section here. So again, maintaining one central leader is not always possible. I know you'll drive around and see trees or millions of trees with codominant leaders, but your goal is always keeping one central strong leader. And like to your point,
the reason we see that though is because people not hiring the right people to do the job.
Exactly.
They're looking at the cheapest price, and I guess putting in an AC unit or something, you've got the same material, but when you are using the tree trimmer, you got to have the knowledge to cut the right,
yeah,
the right branches.
Yeah, your trees are an investment on your property, and replacing a tree is not cheap. Dealing with damages because of limbs coming down and hitting somebody's roof or screen enclosure, hurting somebody. It costs a lot more in the long run, in my opinion. These are just examples. Again, this is in a parking lot, good form, which tree on the right, you have a strong central leader with smaller limbs that branch off. Yeah, and then on that left picture, you have codominant leaders, and in this section here, you have included bark, which is an area where the tree can split.
And then the way you would get rid of the codominant one growing to the right, you wouldn't just cut and remove that all in one trimming, because the size of that looks to be almost the same size as the central leader itself. So it would not heal very well. What you would do, you would subordinate it down and take some weight, and then it'll promote growth to your central leader. And then the one that you cut theoretically will not get any larger. And then 3 to 5 years down the road, make that final cut.
Yeah. So again, ANSI 300 standards require you to, if you're going to subordinate or do a reduction cut of that size, you want to always remove a larger limb that's less than 1/3 the size of the other codominant limb. So, and the way to achieve that is if you start trimming on a magnified view, I can't do it here, but if you start trimming this section of the tree, taking off one limb for 1 year and then another limb, that stunts the growth. So as that one stays or remains the same size, the other side will start growing and getting thicker. When it becomes 1/3 or less the size of the other codominant limb, you're safe enough to take it off completely.
Which is another thing that's hard to sell to the customer, because you cut out that hole right there and they're like, what did you do to my tree?
Yeah.
But you would really want to cut this side here so that next year the growth from this will fill that in.
Yeah.
That way, when you do make the final cut, the tree will look natural and normal.
Yeah, and that's the right way to do it. And it could be a process. It could take, 2 or 3 years, sometimes even longer. These are just examples of what we were talking about, a reduction cut and a removal cut. Let's see how we're doing on time. Pretty good. Again, just examples, when we, whoops. So these are just examples here of, at the bottom here, sometimes you get water sprouts or those suckers. If you didn't know what those were, you also get them growing at the bottom of the tree, sometimes on some limbs. I don't know if it's ANSI 300 standards, I think it is, but also Broward County standards require you to only remove suckers or water sprouts on the bottom 1/3 of the tree, because again, trees use sunlight, they absorb sunlight for their energy. So some of the smaller suckers or water sprouts on the inside of the tree should be left in there. Removing all that is another term that we're gonna talk about very soon. But so going to this picture right here, you can take off this limb right here during the annual tree trim because it's a very low hanging limb. Water sprouts or suckers right here. You have a few intersecting branches here where you see those intersecting branches kind of rub against each other and they become weak. Or sometimes they just kind of fuse together depending on the tree, which also make for a weak joint.
Then other limbs trying to compete with the codominant limb.
Which is the most important. Yeah, exactly.
So they're removing some here to on the outside here to make the canopy look a little more uniform.
Yeah, and this is that limb you were talking about right here, codominant limb they're taking off. This here is just an example of a crown reduction. So crown reduction meaning, reducing the crown. It's a time-consuming process. So a lot of times, we'll do a tree trimming job, annual tree trimming, and a homeowner will request us to reduce, they'll ask us, why can't you just take this back a lot more? Or so what's included in annual tree trimming, and this is true of all companies, is the basic scope of annual tree trimming is cleaning up the tree, which is removing water sprouts, suckers, dead wood, lifting up the tree if it needs lifting. Again, all the reasons for trimming that we included. Reductions is not part of your annual tree trimming. As I mentioned, if it's 2 feet or less from the building or structure, we do take it back. That we do include, but we don't do anything more. So if you have limbs that are 5 feet away, but the homeowner's requesting it to be taken back, that would be outside the scope of annual tree trimming. So again, going back to crown reductions is a very time-consuming process because anybody can come out there with a saw, just chop it up and reduce the crown and leave stubs everywhere, which is what a lot of companies do that have no clue what they're doing. That's harmful to the tree, and it also looks awful once it starts filling in and growing because, as I'm going to mention, when you leave a stub or you cut a stub, just leave a stub like this, let's say 2 stubs, you get water sprouts that grow at the end of these stubs. So you no longer get nice strong limbs, you get these water sprouts and they look really ugly and they're weakly attached to the tree. So, if they continue to grow, you're going to have weak limbs. And if you're worried about high winds and
not only that, you probably created the problem that they were trying to get rid of. They were trying to get rid of leaf drop or something like that. So when you did this, you just made 10 times the amount of leaves next year.
Exactly.
That are going to be there where foliage goes.
Yeah, exactly. And you get these ugly looking bushy ends and the tree looks awful. So it takes a long time to properly, have a professional tree trimmer look at the tree. A lot of times they got to stand back, look again and see what limbs need to be subordinated because each limb in this tree has got to be subordinated. You can't just, start chopping away. You got to look at it and try to make it look uniform at the same time and say, okay, so I can subordinate this branch here, take this back to this branch here, and it's very time consuming. In regards to palm trees, again, ANSI 300 standards require us to trim 9 and 3 o'clock position, which is the picture in the middle, which is flat right here. A lot of people like this look. Pineapple look. Yeah. Don't get me wrong, it does look nice sometimes. It does look nice.
Like
you don't like it?
Okay.
Like it. But and the reason for why you can't trim it this way is because
the palm tree feeds off of the fronds also. It's not just the root system that feeds them.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the one here in the middle. That's the max you should be taking off.
Right.
You know, some municipalities want you to just take the dead
Dead
fronds
fronds.
only and the seed pods.
Yeah.
But some companies will, they're lazy because you can't get in and get the seed pods because the fronds are, you know, blocking your access.
That's a good point
So
you
they don't
mentioned.
want to reach in and clean it out.
That's a good
They
point you
just make
mentioned.
the cuts fast.
Yeah, if you see a company sometimes cutting them like a pineapple, it's not always because they're trying to do or make them look nicer. It's just a lot easier to access the seed pods by doing it that way. It's actually more time consuming to actually cut it 9 and 3 and then have to go in with a handsaw and cut out the seed pods. But this right here is a proper way to trim the tree. In an example, I'm going to show you guys why it is. Like Jodi said, palm trees feed off their fronds. So, all right, what not to do. I was talking about flush cutting. You can see right here, they actually cut inside the branch collar on both of these cuts. So the healing properties of the tree are no longer there. Below, this is a proper cut. You can see that bulging section here, it still has a branch collar, so it can heal over. Overlifting. This is obviously bad because now the tree is top heavy, and it's lost a lot of its leaves and canopy. So it tries to compensate by growing even taller and longer limbs, which makes it even more top heavy. So a tree like this can
And you get a lot of dieback and
die back. Yeah, you can see in the picture a lot of die back. Yeah. This is a classic example of a hack racking a tree. A tree like this, Jodi, I don't think you can repair. I mean, I can't see anywhere I can trim it back to where I can repair this.
well, what they call this restructure pruning. You'd have to work with the water spouts that it gives you and cut it back every year to try to redevelop, you know, a new
Yeah.
canopy.
Yeah,
It
branch
could-
structure.
Could be done, but it's, like I said, a lot of work, a lot of
Years,
money, a lot of
years.
years.
Yeah, and it's gonna look ugly in the meantime.
Mhm.
And still, those water sprout limbs are never as strong as,
Yeah, not as strong.
not
but
as
there's-
strong. Yeah. Example of lines tailing. I see this often. Why do we see this, Jodi? Is it that I don't know if tree companies or
The customer thinks that they just aired out the tree. Well,
Yeah.
look, the air can blow through that now, and that's not the case.
yeah,
All they did was left all the green on the outside, and so now you get some heavy winds and it's just a whipping effect and the limbs just start snapping.
yeah. So you get a lever arm effect, and yeah, there's no greenery on the inside. Trees need their leaves to create energy. Here's an example of pencil necking, which is basically, again, when you cut the tree like a pineapple, you can see this thin area in the middle here. Who knows, maybe a couple years the tree didn't get enough nutrients because it was trimmed this way, and you start getting a thin, narrow neck in this area. Examples. I just want to see how we're doing on time here. Okay. I'm gonna run through this. So, classic example of a branch collar. You can see that little bulging section. That's a branch collar. You want to make the cut right outside that branch collar. Classic example of pin, or included bark. So codominant leaders, 2 leaders, and in this section right here has bark that's fused on the inside of the tree.
It's not attached. All that blackness is just like,
Yeah. So in this section right here, you can see that dark section. That's exactly where it's split. Some homeowners, I get this asked every now and then, is to top a tree. You never really want to cut the main central leader on a tree. The only reason for that would be under utility wires, FPL. Sometimes they'll do it because they have no other option. But you never want to, you know, cut the main central leader on a tree. This is what water sprouts looks like when you hat rack a tree. You start getting these very thin, weak limbs growing off the stubs, and I'll show you examples of how ugly that looks. I'm going to run through this real quick. But down here, you got thinning out. You can see it create a little more sunlight to get through. Vista pruning right above. Might have overlifted here on the right, but just classic example of, you know, a little bit of vista pruning and also thinning out. You can get some sunlight. I mentioned in the beginning of Royal Palm Ties, it's a service we offer. Royal palms, usually these are planted because they're so beautiful. They're planted in like this, main spine of a neighborhood, the main drive. And you can have a sidewalk or street on the other side of it. And it could be a liability because these seed pods fall and so do the fronds. And these trees are, how tall are Royal palms?
40, 50 feet
50
tall.
feet tall.
You hear about it from a lot of property managers. The fronds hit a person, break their shoulder or car windows quite often.
Yeah.
But yeah, like you said, the Royal Palm Ties, it's a service that we offer now. So
Yeah.
but if you have 80 Royal Palms going down the street, it can be costly because you do have to change them out
Every quarter,
it says every 3 months.
every 3 months.
Yes.
Yeah.
You might be able to go a little bit longer than that, but I think for the health of the tree, it should be done, every 3 months.
And by the way, about the
It
Royal
does
palm
work.
ties, yeah, it definitely works.
Works good.
The way it works is you basically tie right up here, you put a palm tie after you trim the tree, and Royal palms, for example, are self-cleaning trees. So the fronds, when they start dying, will peel off and they'll stay up there. So will the seed pods. Nothing will fall down and harm anyone.
And we use a professional green tie that actually looks good, or you don't really notice it. Some people put them up the black tie
Bungee
straps and
cords,
stuff
yeah,
like
it
that. It
doesn't look good.
doesn't look too good.
Another example of included bark, you can see the dark area where it's split. All right, this is an important section I just added. So this is misconceptions and other useful information. In this section, we're going to talk about the best time to trim trees, annual tree trimming and reductions. I think I already went over, the difference between annual tree trimming and crown reductions and why, it's price-wise, it's a big difference, and that's why it's not included in annual tree trimming. It's something we definitely offer, but it would be something additional. Really quick to touch on shaping trees with hedge trimmers. There is no municipality that allows us to do this. ANSI 300 doesn't allow this anybody to trim trees with a hedge trimmer. The reason for this is because in a way it's sort of like hat racking. You're destroying the branch structure on the outer side of the outer part of the tree. And also you're creating a very dense canopy on the outside. So when you trim with a hedge trimmer, you get a dense outer wall, like a wall, a leaf structure, and light does not get on the inside to the inside of the tree. All right, to touch on the best time to trim trees. So flat out, to get the most bang for your buck, the best time to trim trees is actually when the trees are dormant. So that would be winter, or late autumn, winter, and early spring. Trying to convey this, or it's, I don't really have an issue with the property managers. Usually if there's any property manager board members listening, property managers, I can explain this to and they can understand. But for whatever reason, the board or a lot of times homeowners think the best time to trim is just before hurricane season.
Yeah.
It's in fact the worst time to trim your trees. They're in growing season. I did a property, I don't want to mention the property, we had to trim the tree during that time. They requested it to have it done in those months. And we were doing Washingtonia palms, and I think it was a week after we trimmed them. Washingtonias grow those long snake-looking seed pods, and it was not more than a week. They had already grown out to like full length, and it just looked awful. But yeah, when you're even hardwood trees, if you're trimming trees during the growing season, hardwood trees are going to compensate by growing a lot of suckers. So after we leave, maybe a couple months later, you get all these suckers and water sprouts. Trees look awful. And also, just so you know, so when you do your annual tree trimming, 1 year of annual tree trimming will not make a difference in terms of, how the tree copes with high winds. It's having your trees trimmed every year, which is why it's called annual tree trimming. Having it done every year, that effect of every year is what keeps your trees hurricane ready because they're thinned out properly. Having them done every year, that's really what helps with trees during high winds. So there is, in my opinion, really no benefit to having it done hurricane season or even in the growing season. Only negatives.
Yeah, I don't think it saves anything from breaking or
No.
now if you got a huge codominant leader growing over your roof, maybe you
Right.
did hired the right person to do the right thing as far as subordinating it back to where there's not so much weight on it, or removing it completely if it's a proper cut, then that's
Yeah.
worth
Yeah.
doing.
But that's outside the scope of annual tree trimming.
Yes.
That would be an additional expense. That would be like a reduction. Excuse me. The only exception to what we just talked about is date palms. In your experience, the best time to trim those, only because of the way they fruit, would be April and May, right?
Yep, April and May. Learned that the hard way.
Yeah.
Yeah, trimming them any earlier, you end up getting other seed pods generate, and then the customer's like, well, what happened? You just trimmed these things. And all of them, they seem to seed at the same time. It's very phenomenal. It's always April and May they come out, but you don't want to let them go too long either, because those berries make a heck of a stain.
Yeah. So what we do when we do annual tree trimming for a customer, if they have it done in December or January or February, is we come back afterwards and we trim the date palms in April and May.
Yes.
May.
Where we see them, all the seed pods are generated.
Right. One question I get asked a lot is from property managers is to look at driveways, lifted pavers, sidewalks. So here's an example. You can see on both pictures, that tree is about 25 to 35 feet tall or 30 feet tall. It's a live oak. It's literally inches away from the sidewalk. So in a case like this, if the property manager asked me to look at it, my suggestion right here would be to remove the tree, because there's no way to prune the roots and put in a root barrier without damaging the tree's integrity or even damaging the tree altogether, just like harming the tree, because you're cutting way too close to the trunk. The rule of thumb, I'm sorry,
No,
yeah. Rule of thumb for me, what makes me feel comfortable is if a tree around that size, 5 or 6 feet, if there was 5 or 6 feet of clearance between the tree trunk and the sidewalk, then I would feel comfortable pruning the roots and putting in a root barrier. And again, those are options. You can prune the roots and you can also prune the roots and install a barrier. Installing a barrier requires going a little deeper, so we come in with a trencher and going a little further after pruning the roots and putting in a barrier.
or if you're hiring somebody to fix the sidewalks, you might want to make sure that they do a proper root pruning job when they remove the sidewalks, because if they just put the concrete back on the same roots that just did that damage, you're going to have the same problem again in a couple of years.
Yeah. But the only issue with that is the person that does the sidewalk is going to be cutting the roots regardless.
They're
And
not doing it, then they're not going to be doing it properly, more than likely.
yeah, and if you're cutting the roots that close to the trunk, in high winds, in a case like this, that tree might fall over on the homeowner's side.
Yeah,
So-
right towards the house.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
ideally, it is better to get rid of the tree and plant something new that is a proper size and distance away from the sidewalk.
We use Typar root barrier, which is like a chemical fabric root barrier with chemical herbicide. It doesn't kill the roots. When the roots touch it, it just diverts them. It is the most effective root barrier you can install, way more than a mechanical barrier. It's not a cheap product, but it's the same product that's used by the city and its county streets and roadways. And a 19-inch barrier, by the way, just so you're familiar or aware, is recommended. So by sidewalks and streets, 19-inch barriers was recommended. They sell a 12, 19, 24 and larger barriers, but 12 I think according to Typar is too small of a barrier. We use 19-inch.
Yeah. Said it's way too close to be able to dig down past those hard roots and put one in.
Yeah, exactly. So again, going back to some of these things here, so driveways, so we talked about that. I'm gonna talk about tree roots in your foundation. So I also get asked often about, a property manager will ask me, say, homeowners complaining about tree roots near the my foundation. So in that case, one, I'm going to say, homeowners tend to get or panic when they see that. It's almost impossible. I mean, there's only a few reasons. Like trees down here, they might have like an invasive root system, but they don't usually damage a foundation. Foundation footings are usually like 6 inches of concrete and a slab after that. They will damage driveways and sidewalks if they're planted right beside it. And they have nowhere else to kind of grow their roots. But if they are, planted far away from a house, as soon as they touch the foundation, they're going to stop and grow alongside the house or foundation.
Most of the time when you do see the damage inside pipes or cracking the slabs, there was already a damaged area to begin with.
Yeah.
So the roots just found it. They didn't create it.
That's exactly what I was going to bring up.
Yeah.
So often, plumbers, I hear property managers say, look, the plumber found roots inside the drain pipes. The reason for that is it was pre-existing. It was water leaking and the roots will find it. And that's an effect you'll see often, like you'll see surface roots growing near like gutter downspouts or leaking spigots. They'll find their way to water. So if you have a broken drain pipe, they will find their way there and start going inside the pipes. But the only time I can think a tree will break a pipe is if it's like right beside it,
Mhm.
and
It's big
it's just big enough that when it swells up and it gets larger, it lifts up a pipe and breaks it. But that would be the only time. We're talking about like a foot away. Yeah. And then talking about and also just to mention also about the whole tree roots going underneath the foundation and damaging the slab. Another thing to mention is South Florida has really bad soil.
Yes.
So after like a foot or less than a foot, sometimes you just get sand, and tree roots don't want to grow in sand. So it's even less of a reason for a tree's roots to want to go underneath your foundation, which is why you see so many surface roots here in South Florida. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about, and I want to bring it up for questions, is HOA. So first thing is, here's pictures of two communities that we do work in. We don't do, these are resident trees, so homeowner trees. We don't do the resident trees, they're just common ground trees. These are upscale neighborhoods, both of them. And the one on the bottom here, you're looking at, I think, $650,000 to $850,000 homes in there. The one above, they're in millions. If I lived in a neighborhood like this, I would be furious for two reasons. One, it looks terrible. Two, it devalues the entire neighborhood and your house. This is where I guess property managers and board members need to be educated, which is great that you're attending this this webinar so you can understand what hat racking is. So all these trees here were hat racked. This is like some guy with a chainsaw going from door to door and saying, "Do you want me to trim your tree?" And they're, yeah, sure, whatever. It's a good price.
Make it smaller.
Make it smaller. So in every picture here, they reduced the tree, but they did nothing but leave stubs. And then you get these bushy ends here of water sprouts, these ugly looking long water sprouts that you can never really, in this case, for this tree here, there's nothing I can do. In any of these trees here, I don't see how I can repair any of these. Like, these are done. These are done. And all these trees look like Halloween trees. They look awful. So, your property values are going to decrease. What I would recommend in a case like this is, first and foremost, you guys get educated, which you are. You're watching this webinar. Second of all is, if you're a property manager watching this, maybe forward this webinar to your board members. And then violations. But I would first educate the residents, because I don't think they even know. Prior to me doing this kind of stuff, I had no clue leaving a stub was bad for a tree. So, I can send out some information. If you want to reach out to me, send me your email, send me a request. I'll send you information, maybe a one-page PDF that you can print out or email to your homeowners, just educating everybody in the neighborhood what hat racking is, what to look for. I'm not saying use us. I'm just letting you guys know for your homeowners, I mean, to let them know that if they're going to hire somebody, I wish to say licensed and insured would be enough, but it isn't in the examples I showed. So maybe have them be educated on what hat racking is, and maybe show the trimmer before they do any work. And I'll create a little picture showing them, according to ANSI 300 pruning standards, what hat racking is. Ask the trimmer if he knows what hat racking is, and say, if you're going to reduce the size of the tree, are you going to do it right, and question them. And then, of course, like you mentioned, property managers enforcing this kind of stuff and violating the homeowners. And in these cases here, all these pictures, I have every single one of those trees removed and have the homeowner have to replace them, unfortunately. So, yeah, that's pretty much, I have the questions and answers, but I'd rather you guys ask me some questions. So, Hikari, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Perfect. Can you help
Are
me?
you?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm
are
ready
you
for
able to
questions
see
and answers.
the Q&A on the side?
Let me come out of this shared view here. Okay. Yeah, questions and answers right here. Perfect. All right, we're
So if you
starting
see
with
any good relevant questions that can help everybody, you can read through those.
Sure. So Hikari, if we don't get through all of these before the end, is there a way for you to send these to me, or can they just email
Of
us?
course.
Yeah.
Yep. I can send this report of who asked the question and then their question, so you can
Okay,
address
great.
those. And then again, Shawn and Jodi's email addresses will be included in the email I'll be sending afterwards to everybody. So if you do have any follow-up questions or any questions that you think of later, you can email them and ask those as well.
Awesome, Gary. Thank you. All right, so first question, Elizabeth Wolf. Should I trim a gumbo limbo? Yeah, why not? There's no reason not to trim it. Yeah, you can trim them. They don't have a very big branch structure, but if you have longer limbs, just make sure you're subordinating the branches when you're trimming them.
Yeah, because they'll really sprout out.
Yeah.
Limbs over the person's property.
Let me go back to that one.
That's a good one.
Okay, how do we deal with limbs?
Crossing over my property line, dropping leaves from 50 feet or higher. No, it does not require permitting. The tree has to be pruned properly. You can't just go up into the tree and hack it straight up. You're better off having a professional do it, subordinate it back to another limb that's growing off, and then it helps you with your problem of all the leaves, because you're getting rid of a lot of foliage, but you're still doing it right, and the amount of foliage is not going to grow back.
That's actually that's a great question. If I can kind of like get on that one too. So yeah, it's like homeowners request this a lot. They get, my neighbor's trees growing on my property, growing over my property line. State of Florida allows you to trim your neighbor's tree if their limbs are going over on your side. The issue with that is you can't just cut it right at your property line and leave stubs, because like Jodi said, you're adding to the problem, because if you do, first of all, you're harming the tree. And second of all, you're going to get these water sprouts, and a lot more leaves are going to fall eventually. So the proper way of doing this is getting with your neighbors, seeing if they want to have it trimmed. If they don't, then I get if you want to pay for it, but let them know, you're going to have somebody come and go on their property and properly subordinate those branches back to lateral limbs, instead of just keep cutting stubs right at your property line. Jason Anderson.
You would have to get the municipality and the
Municipalities
city or
city
the county involved with that. But
yeah,
you open up a can of worms for your HOA, which you shouldn't be doing things wrong like that. But
first I would ask why did they cut the tree down? Sometimes there's a reason to cut down a tree if it's damaging utilities and there's no way around it. But that tree should be replaced. Most most counties or municipalities, I should say, would prefer that you govern yourselves. So, if you have an HOA govern themselves, if they're going to remove a tree, replace that tree that they removed. And of course, some municipalities require you without a doubt to get a permit before you do anything. One comes to mind right now, but I won't mention which one. Yeah. But yeah, first find out why exactly they removed the tree, and then just get with your HOA. I think would be a better thing, and just see if they can replace it with another mahogany.
Yeah, talk it out with them instead of opening up city or county coming in. It can be very expensive for yourself also.
Yeah. Here we have a question: how do we determine if roots are reaching the building, can be cut, and how far? All right, so yeah, if you're worried about roots, usually they're surface roots and they're harmless. Like I said, if they hit your foundation, they're going to grow alongside the wall and not underneath it. But if the tree is, a tree that's maybe 35 feet tall at the most, and you want to give it at least 5 feet of clearance.
Probably even more than that.
Probably more. Yeah, I agree.
If you have the room, with the sidewalks, you're limited, but I know some, I know one county, or not county, but one city in particular that they want to go by the measurement of the trunk of the tree and then times it by a certain number. That's how many feet out you're allowed to root prune.
Right. And that prevents like shocking the tree and harming the tree.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then options are, if it is far enough, then you can root prune. Another option is root prune and install a barrier. Yeah. How expensive is palm tree strapping, royal palms? It generally goes.
It depends on how many you have.
Right.
If you're coming out and doing 1 to 5, it's gonna be a bit more costly than doing a whole, HOA of 100.
Right.
Prices
So give like an average price.
Average would probably be like, 75 to 100 per tree. And keep in mind, these are just rough numbers, and then, you know, maybe if the whole HOA was doing it, maybe $50 a tree if they had 100 or more, 50, maybe a little bit higher.
And you got to realize the reason is when we come to replace the ties, we don't reuse them. They have to be cut, tree trim. And this involves not just a tie. This is trimming the tree, coming in 4 times, you know, replacing it each time. And of course, it's 75 each time, or whatever the cost is, depending on the quantity. But each time the trees have to be retrimmed, come out there, dispose of, and all that.
And even if you don't sign up for the next time, we will come out, take the tie off and leave it as is. We're not gonna just leave the
Okay,
tie on
because
there
it's harmful
forever,
to the tree. Abraham Bravo, is it needed to trim trees every year? If you're a homeowner, you know, I would thin them out. Yeah, a little bit done each year, which is why it's called annual tree
It
trim.
depends on the location also. I had a conversation with someone today about this. I mean, like park area trees don't really want to be trimmed. They're usually trimmed for a reason. I mean, but when you got these lot lines that are so small and trees are so close to your homes and stuff, that's the reason that people like to do a normal maintenance on it. And also it keeps the prices even as opposed to waiting 4 or 5 years to trim a tree, and then you know, the price is outrageous, and then like, why does it cost so much money?
Yeah, and to add to that too, if you skip a couple of years and think you're going to save money, you know, a company's, you're not going to say. So a company's going to come in and price it higher, but they're still not going to do the same amount of trimming as if you had it done every year. So the healthiest way to do it for your trees is every year. They look nice, they're hurricane ready. But if you can't afford it, maybe every 2 years for hardwood trees, but palm trees should be done every year. Van Martin. Oh, okay, yeah. So our landscape manager has a product it's a non-toxic, it's a translucent stain, and it comes in many different. It's his own blend. It's you can stain your tree like a reddish, burnt orange, even like a yellowish. So you can really choose the color. And the translucent stain kind of like shows the wood grain. I would really only stain like Sylvester palms is all I can think of. That's the only ones that really look nice. And then they put like a clear coat on top of that.
Or a tree canopy from trees on our condo property overhang other properties. I don't believe you are required to trim them. I mean, if they called the city and said something, if I don't think they would make them good unless it was actually causing a huge problem.
Yeah,
because
I
don't
would
think they would force you.
No, they wouldn't force. And I'd wait for them. And again, I in the state of Florida, like I said, the neighbor has the right to trim your tree. They can request you to trim it. I don't think you're required to trim it, but in case something does happen in the future, if a limb breaks or something, you might be held liable. So just keep that in
Maybe
mind.
one more question here, since we're
One
almost
more.
time.
Okay.
And then again, I appreciate everyone's engagement here and all your questions. I will be sending that over to Shawn and Jodi so they can address you after the webinar.
Yeah. By the way, thanks guys. A lot of questions. I love this. Awesome. Elizabeth, again, what about Ganoderma and palms? Yeah,
The trees are shot, done.
Yeah.
There's no cure for it.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's becoming more and more, especially with like Areca palms. They're just getting infected at a quick rate.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching. For more great educational content, click the subscribe button now.